I speak only for myself, but the reasons to go into Manhattan are getting fewer and fewer. Russ and Daughters just opened in the Navy Yard. We have a Supreme store, if that's your thing. And now the Center for Fiction has relocated from Midtown Manhattan to 15 Lafayette Avenue in downtown Brooklyn, just around the corner from us here at BRIC. It seems like a fitting relocation, with fiction writers from Jennifer Egan to Jonathan Lethem to Jhumpa Lahiri calling Brooklyn home. Joining us to talk truth and fiction, we're joined by Noreen Tomassi, the center's executive director. Thanks for joining us. And we also have author Mitchell Jackson, who is a former fellow at the center and whose new book, Survival Math, Notes on an All-American Family, has just been released. Thanks so much for coming on Moment 2 BK.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Noreen, maybe we'll start with you. Can you tell me what the Center for Fiction is? What's your mission?
Sure. We're a literary nonprofit. We're one of the few literary nonprofits in the entire country that actually has our own building, our own space. I think there are about 10 in the entire country. We're the only literary nonprofit in the entire country focused on the art of fiction. There's Poets House, there's the Playwrights Center, there are centers for other forms, but we focus on fiction. And more broadly, we focus on storytelling in all its forms. So how people tell stories between the covers of a book, how they tell them on screens, large and small, how they tell the stories through music, through dance, through other forms. So the new space in Brooklyn gives us an opportunity to do all of that in a gorgeous space, if I do say so myself. The space is beautiful. Our architect, Julie Nelson, did a magnificent job in integrating 70,000 books into a space and not having it feel dark or overcrowded.
Why the decision to move the center from the cultural backwater that is Manhattan to Brooklyn?
It's a good point. There are so many reasons. We were in Midtown Manhattan, and we were not surrounded by like-minded cultural organizations. That was a big problem. So here we're in the middle of a cultural district that has how many? 40 arts institutions of one kind or another within a mile of one another. We're right across the street from the Brooklyn Academy of Music, around the corner from BRIC, next to Theater for a New Audience and Mark Morris. It gives us so many opportunities to collaborate and to share audiences. In addition, Brooklyn really is one of the literary centers of the world now. There are so many writers living here. There are so many independent presses here. When we were in Midtown Manhattan, our audience came from Brooklyn. We also really liked the idea of being in a borough where we felt connected to the diversity that really is New York City. And sometimes in Midtown Manhattan, you don't feel that.
Sure, a little less diverse, I think you
Yeah.
can say. What does the Center for Fiction offer to young writers who are maybe working on their first or their second book?
Well, I think the thing that comes first to mind is a fellowship program, which I was one of the inaugural fellows in 2011. And I can remember when I was a fellow that there was the gala, and we all were invited to the gala. And I sat down at a table, and it had the placards. This is when I didn't know that everyone had seating. And the person like, "Oh, you can't sit there." I said, "Okay." And she was like, "What's your name?" I said, "Mitchell." She said, "Mitchell Jackson?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, I'm from Bloomsbury." And then someone else came to the table, and they were also from Bloomsbury, and another person came. And then I realized that I was at the Bloomsbury table while my novel was on submission to Bloomsbury. And so, Noreen had the foresight to put me at a table that was going to help me along in my career. And the other thing is I was just in that room. And to me, that's probably, I know the National Book Awards are important, but to me, the Center for Fiction is probably the most important place to be in the literary world in any given year.
And you've referred to Noreen as your literary fairy godmother,
Yes.
Is that right?
That's right.
Noreen, do you see that as part of your role to try and open doors or bring young authors who maybe are outside of the literary establishment inside, make those connections?
I do. There are two things that are most important to me in my work, aside from ensuring that the Center for Fiction thrives. Of course, I want to do that. But there are two programs, and one is the program for emerging writers and how we support emerging writers and how we continue to build the connections among the people who have been our emerging writer fellows. There's nothing more important to me than developing and assisting young writers and emerging writers of all ages, really, to get them started on their careers. It's so fulfilling, it's so interesting, and it's lots of fun, so I love it.
So your building, you mentioned, it's very inviting. It has these huge windows. You can see inside. You can see all of the books. Is it open to the public? If people are walking by, how can they participate in the offerings that the Center for Fiction has?
It is open to the public. We have the entire first floor with our auditorium, our cafe, our bookshop is all open to the public. If people want to use the upstairs rooms, a beautiful reading room, a beautiful terrace, they need to join as a member, which is only $150 a year. It's very cheap. Or they can enroll in our writer's studio or in reading groups or in our writing workshops. So I also want to go back for a minute to supporting emerging writers. There is, I think, a sense that fiction writers don't need the same kind of support early in their career that poets might need or that playwrights
Poets
might
are
need.
very fragile, to be fair.
They are. But because of Stephen King, because there are fiction writers that are very, very, very successful, there's, I think, a widespread notion that fiction writers should just sink or swim. But really, I think for the first 5 to 10 years of a fiction writer's career, they need support, they need community, they need the help, they need a place to be, both a real place to go to and find support, but also just psychically a place where they know they're loved and supported. I think it's important.
So, Mitchell, your current book that just came out, Survival Math, is not a work of fiction.
No, it's nonfiction.
But your debut novel was sort of a work of autobiographical fiction, right?
Yes.
But you've talked a little bit about how you don't really see too much distance between writing nonfiction and writing fiction. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
I think, one of the things we used to talk about in Gordon's class is like, are you telling the truth? Are you writing from your wound? And I really take that as a kind of as the impetus for all of my work. Like, I want to kind of shed a really critical light on some of the experiences that I've had and some of the people close to me and the people in my community. And so I see my work as like speaking to each other. And so I'll be back, and so I'll find a way to make sure that these books are in conversation. So yeah, and I agree with you that, I think fiction writers don't often, it's like if one fiction writer is successful, they take that as the case for too many of us.
In fact, you started writing the residue years when you were in prison, is that right?
Yes, this
I
is
imagine
true.
there wasn't like a lot of support. Maybe
was
I'm
none.
wrong.
No, you're right. Actually, I don't think I told anyone that I was doing it. I remember I got on restriction, not to go to the hole, but like they just make you sit on your bunk for like all day or something. And I started writing then, and some people would come by like, man, what you doing? Oh, man, don't worry about it. But I brought those pages home, and eventually I took them to graduate school with me in another graduate program, and then they became the novel. But also, while I was a fellow or studying with Gordon, I was working on that novel, and he was actually the person that sent me to my first agent and read the manuscript for me. So again, it's like I can connect so much of what's happened to me over this last 10 years back to the Center for Fiction.
We've just expanded our Kids Read program to include high school kids. And the Kids Read serves schools in all 5 boroughs that are in some of the most challenged locations. And for many of the kids that are part of the program, the first book that they get is a book that they get from us. The first encounter they have with an author is the encounter they have with an author through Kids Read. And we've been working with young children and up to middle school. We're expanding it to high school now because we think, especially for young men, it's such a pivotal time in their lives, 14, 15, 16, 17, where there's an opportunity to show them some other reality, some other way of living. But when I said before, there are two things that mean a great deal to me. One is supporting emerging writers, and the other is this program that we did do, Kids Read, Kids Write, because I feel that access to books when I was a child in challenging circumstances literally saved my life. And so I want to do that for other children.
Betty Smith's A Tree Grows in Brooklyn was one of my favorite books as a child, and I think that really encompasses this feeling of like books being a window into worlds that offer more hope than the one that you're currently living in.
Did you know she lived in Queens?
Really? Well, everyone wants to be in Brooklyn, especially if they live in Queens. Mitch, I hear that you're a great reader through the grapevine. Would you be interested in reading something for us?
Okay, I'll just read the opening.
Great.
So the opening is a letter to this guy named Marcus who died in 1788. He was the first person of African descent to step onto the soil of what became Oregon, so it wasn't a state yet. Dear Marcus, ain't no way you could know this, but you were the first of us to set foot on the land that became the state where I was born, Oregon. And now here we are, strangers, but not estranged, more like kindred, more like forevermore tethered to terra firma by a death date and a birth date. Yours, August 16th, 1788. Mine, August 16th, 1975. Here I am centuries after your death, wanting to share with you what has become of the place where you gasped your last breath and I gloried my first.
That's a wonderful opening. Both the opening and the closing of this book are so astonishing. I encourage everyone to read it, and I think it opens and closes with letters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it closes with a letter to your daughter.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and but as he was reading, I was thinking that the thing that we observe in our Emerging Writers program, and that I think it's so important to talk about, is that we're in the midst of an enormous sea change in the world of fiction, where some of the most exciting voices, some of the most interesting work is coming from writers of color all over the country. It's an astonishing explosion of creativity that I think people are only beginning to be aware of. I think 50 years from now, people will look back at this time the way they looked at the Harlem Renaissance. I really do, because there are so many voices that are doing such interesting things and stretching our notion of what fiction can be. So it's a great time to be alive and to be a reader.
Absolutely. And maybe we'll just close out with one piece of advice from each of you that you might give to a young fiction writer.
Well, the easiest piece of advice I can give to a fiction writer is keep writing and know you don't have to write every day because you have a life and you have to make a living.
Yeah.
And come to the Center for Fiction and find a home there. We'll help you.
Mitchell?
I think we feel a pressure to publish and to publish quickly and to publish widely. And I would say don't rush to publication. Like, wait until you feel like this thing is better than what you thought you could make it before, like, kind of getting into the author. Like, to be a writer, right, and just revise before you start worrying about being an author.
Great advice. Mitchell, Noreen, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.